I played this game with 94% accuracy, and despite one mistake, I still think this was one of the best endgame I've ever played. Before watching what happened in the endgame, let's see how we got there. So, first of all, we started with the French, which is the defense I usually play against e4. And there isn't too much to see, honestly, because with disposing to an exchange variation again, I know this line pretty well because I played this line probably 1000 of times, and I'm not even kidding. Like, everyone plays this line or something similar. Like, usually you don't want the knight on c3 because it is actually bad, but that's it. It is minus 0.08, nothing more than that. The difference though is that white cannot use the c pawn, so we can use this knight as a liability. It is more often a weakness than something good with white. So I play c6 in order to prevent knight on b5, and as you can see, black has absolutely zero problems. I'm just developing. There isn't too much to see. I just want to focus on the endgame, but I think it is important to see what happened before. And now I'm trading everything. This point is kind of important, where you need to trade or not, even if you want to get into an endgame. I decided to trade because the knight has to go back on e1, and usually when a piece goes back, it is not a good thing. So you basically are wasting a move, and I'm fine with that. So all of this happened. He decided not to trade the bishop for the knight, which is usually a good thing. The bishop should be slightly better than the knight. Yes, I think it was a good decision. So now I'm targeting the pawn, you need to defend it. And I'm targeting the knight too. So as you can see, this knight, usually it is just a bad thing. It is a weakness. And now I decided to take it. As I said, the bishop is better than the knight, but if you get an advantage by trading the bishop for the knight, just go for it. And the advantage is that now I have a really strong knight. Like, white is slightly better now, but I don't really understand how. This knight is crazy strong. I'm putting pressure on f2. This queen might be annoying pretty soon. So I feel like I'm definitely better. We moved the queen, and now I played queen on a5, which is an important move. The point of queen on a5 is that I'm attacking this pawn, and it's not easy to defend it. Like, you cannot really move a piece in order to defend it, so you need to push it. And that's pretty important. If you want to get into an endgame, you need to understand what happens if your opponent moves a pawn. If our opponent plays pawn on a4, the structure change, and we can't go back because pawns can't go backwards. So after he played pawn on a4, as you can see, this pawn is a liability now, and this pawn might also be a target. And I decided to play the move b5. Now b5, despite the fact is not the best move, it is a really clever one, like from a human point. Because I actually trying to get into an endgame. Why? What is my advantage? My advantage is that I'm attacking this pawn, and you can't really do anything else than taking. Because if you just do nothing, I'm going to take, you take. Let's say somehow this pawn is defended and I cannot take it with the queen. It is still a liability. It is an isolated pawn, and I have a lot of ways to put pressure on it, so I'm probably going to win it. So you have to take. So what happens? Again, after something happens with the pawn structure, you need to think about all the position, all the plans again, because they might change. So he decided to take, and now I took with the pawn, and that's really important. Because after I take with the pawn, I can make a pass one. So what is my point? I'm trying to reach an endgame where I might be able to make a pass pawn. Because in this case, I have 2 pawns against 1. So if someone is better in the endgame, at least practically speaking, is going to be black. I decided not to take with the queen, because if I take and the queen takes, okay. But you don't have to take with the queen, that's the point. So if you take with the pawn, you are sure you have 2 pawns in this case, and you're going to make a pass pawn. So I decided to take, and now I played knight on e5. Knight on e5 is basically an invitation to an endgame, and I accepted it. So I played queen on e1. Now you could play king on h2, but it is tricky. although it will be equal. The best move is queen on f1, which my opponent played, and now I decided to trade, which makes a lot of sense because again, I can make a pass pawn and I can work on it. So I decided to trade, and now I take the knight too. So after this happened, let's take a look at the position. So he has 4 pawns on the king side, so he might try to push them in order to make a pass pawn. I have this pawn on d5, which is isolated, although it's not a pass one, but it might be pretty strong, or it might be a liability. So I need to be careful about that. But my strongest asset in this position is the a pawn, because I can push it and make a pass one. Because as you can see, the structure is not symmetrical. Now, why am I saying that I have an advantage? Because despite the fact he can make a pass pawn on the king side, he has 4 pawns, so he's going to be much slower, while on the queen side I have 2 pawns. They are much faster because I just have to move 2 of them in order to create a pass pawn. So the thing we need to do now is pushing this pawn, trying to create a passer, and also trying to move the king into the center. So I decided to play a5 because it was attacked, but it's not only that, it is attacked, but I might play a6. a6 is not that good, because maybe you can play something like bishop on b6, blocking everything, but if you play a5, you are going to make a passer. That's the point. You need to be quick in the endgame. You cannot waste any single move, so a5 is the best. I decided to bring the king into the center, and I played king on f8. This was the only mistake I did in this endgame, and it is probably a losing one, but is super difficult to understand why. The move is king on d3, and white is winning because after you play king on e7, which is natural, you can play c4, and that's the problem. So c4, let's say I play a4, because if I take and take, I lose. I take, pawn take, I cannot take back because I lose the knight. Let's say I play king on e6. Well, you don't have to take now, because you can play king on d4. You are attacking this pawn, I cannot take, and I'm going to lose a pawn. So instead of doing that, you could try to play the move, for example, you see, yeah, I think a4. a4, but then they take, and again, there is still this pressure, you can't do anything about that. Apparently, there is even the move knight take on f2, so Stockfish is suggesting to sacrifice the knight in order to survive. So as you can see, this position is pretty bad. Going back, king on f8, if you find all of this combination, so taking advantage of the fact that this pawn cannot take, and that you are going to get in time to this pawn and win it, you win. But my opponent played another move, f3. And now the position is equal, super equal. I move the knight and I figure it out. Now, where shall I move the knight? It is actually pretty simple. I don't want to play knight on g5 because it takes, damaging my structure. You can play knight on g3, as simple as that. What happens is that you still keep the knight and you give a check. Now, it is also pretty important to keep the knight because despite the fact the bishop might be stronger than the knight is pretty tricky. And considering the fact that all of my pawns are on light square, I actually have the advantage, because you have a dark square bishop, you cannot defend them. That's the weakness of the bishop. It can control a lot of squares, but just of one color. The knight can attack both of them. So the king moves, and now looks like I'm going to lose the pawn, but I'm still in time to defend everything because I have king on e7. Now he played bishop on c5, and at this point I can just play king on e6, attacking the pawn. You need to defend it, you need to do something about that. And he decided to play bishop on d6. Bishop on d6 is a mistake, and it is pretty simple to see why. This pawn is super weak. The only thing that defends it is the bishop. So in every endgame, you need to understand the weakness of your opponent and try to target it. So the weakness is, I would say, this pawn. So if we attack the bishop and the bishop has to move, we are going to win it. Now, you can play, for example, bishop on b8, bishop on c7. Although, after you play this and you attack the pawn, first of all, I can move it, and you have to take, otherwise I just push. And while you try to win this pawn, because I'm going to push it and make a queen, so you need to do something about that, I can maneuver the knight, start winning these pawns, and then target these. So at the end of the day, I'm probably going to be up a pawn. So let's say you play something like king on c3, I can push for example, but even knight on h4. I play knight on h4, I'm going to win this pawn. Let's say you push this pawn, I'm going to take this and win this. So you're not in time to defend everything. You're going to lose at least 2 pawns. That's the point. So instead of doing that, you could play the move g4. Although even after you play g4, I still have a knight on h4 and you're not really defending anything. You cannot defend this pawn because I'm going to push the a pawn. That's the point. So my opponent decided to play c4. This move is basically useless. It does nothing because we could even wait. And I played knight on h4. The point is that if you take, my king is in a great position and you're going to lose a pawn anyway, so I'm going to win the endgame. That's why c4 is not a good move. It does absolutely nothing. My opponent decided to push instead, which is the best move. Although I saw that too, and I understood that my opponent has absolutely nothing. Right? This is a pass pawn. I need to be careful because if you push it again, he might have something because it's not easy to reach it at that point. So I can play the move, the really strong move, king on d7. King on d7 is a pretty strong move because I'm defending this, and I'm also gaining the time on the bishop. So bishop on d6, and now we can win the pawn, or we could even push the a pawn. I decided to push the a pawn, and the point is misplacing the king. Although my opponent has a move that doesn't really save his position, but at least he gains some activity, I would say. So he decided to play c6. The point is that after the take, you can take with the bishop, so you don't have to misplace the king, but you still are going to lose the pawn. So knight take on g2, I'm up a pawn. So I'm up a pawn in this position. I know for the fact that it's super winning, but I still need to find a way to win this. How can I do that? First of all, my opponent is maneuvering the bishop in order to control my knight movement. Now, we don't have to panic because, as you can see, my opponent doesn't really have a clear way to control all of the knight squares. He cannot get on g5, neither on f4, on e3. He can just go on d2. So it's not going to be super strong. So I decided to improve the position of the king on d6. The point is that I want the king on this side in order to win material. So king on d4 and now obviously king on e6. The king is on the best square for this position because I have to defend this pawn obviously. So it's time to think about where I want to put the knight and how I want to play this position in order to stop every possible counterplay for my opponent. So you can think about the move knight on h4, which is pretty good, but there is something better. You cannot push this pawn, you can push this, but if I play the move g5, you have a problem as white. You can't even push this. So the only thing you can do, because you can't even move the king and going to win the pawn, is moving the bishop. So it's not Zugzwang, but we are close to getting a Zugzwang position. So after the bishop moves, he has to go on the same square again. Otherwise, I mean, I'm going to gain a lot of advantage. That's why g5 is so important. We could improve the position of the knight, but if we manage to block every possible good move that our opponent has, obviously we are going to win. So we are attacking the pawn, and the only way to defend it is by pushing it, because we can trade. You had to trade, obviously, so that, but after we take and bishop take, I saw that there was a knight check. So we check with the knight, the king moves, and we win the pawn. Although there is a problem, because the h pawn is still hanging. So before doing all of that, I decided to move the h pawn. And I saw this move before playing knight on e1. All of this idea has a point. The point is that after we get a position like this, I'm going to win a pawn. Why? Because my opponent can't do anything. If you move the bishop, I still have this check. and I win the pawn. If you move the king, well, I still attack this and I'm going to win the pawn. And even if you move the pawn, I still win the pawn. That's the important part. After all this happen, I can take the e or the h pawn. And this is also pretty important. The endgame is the most important part of the game, where you need to be super precise, super accurate. Even if you are completely winning, in order to be sure that your opponent has absolutely nothing, you have to be cold-blooded and find the best move. Now, you might think the best move is taking the pawn on e5 because it's a central one, so it makes sense to win it, which is true. We still win, obviously, no problem. But you also have to consider something. This pawn is not going anywhere. It's blockaded by the king. So after we take the pawn on h4, if you go back, I'm still going to win it. The difference is that if we take this pawn now, you can defend this. So if we take now, we just win a pawn. If we take the h pawn, we actually win two. That's really important. This is how you have to think in an endgame. Is there a move that allows me to have an even slightly bigger advantage? Because after you get some slight advantages, the total advantage is going to be huge. So I decided to take the bishop moves, knight on g6, and my opponent resigned. Why? Well, it is pretty simple. There is no way to defend this pawn. I'm going to win this. I have 3 pawns against nothing, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to win. This shows the importance of having a pass pawn. We gain the advantage from this. We were already better. Now Stockfish is saying that is perfectly equal. I would argue though black is better because for the scratcher we have a pass pawn, which is an asset. So that's it for today, guys. I hope this video was helpful and you learned something, and see you soon with the next video.